Welcome to this lecture on Kant's Ethics. What I want to do in this lecture is discuss some of the more difficult areas of Kant's ethical theory. In the history of philosophy, Kant is one of the more difficult philosophers to read and to understand. You all have a brief excerpt from Kant's groundwork of the metaphysics of morals in the textbook that you're going to read for this week. And as you know, if you've read it already, it can be a pretty difficult read. So I want to spend some time breaking it down piece by piece, step by step, in order to give you a better understanding of Kant's ethical theory. Let's begin with deontology. Kant's ethical theory is known as a deontological theory of ethics. And deontology comes from the Greek word deontos, which means duty or obligation. Kant's ethics, we can say, is a duty-based view of ethics. The role of duty itself, and moral duty in particular, will play a very important role in Kant's ethical system. For starters, we can say that deontology is the view that moral duty must be determined rationally and is independent of the consequences of acts. Kantian ethics, or deontological ethics, is typically contrasted with utilitarianism. And for this week's reading, there's a section on utilitarianism. Utilitarianism focuses primarily on the consequences of an action. The focus is more on the overall goal of the action. What does the action produce? Does it produce happiness for the greatest number of people possible? If it does, for a utilitarian, that action would be morally permissible. It would be the right thing to do because of the overall outcome or the consequences of that particular action. Kant's ethical theory is really the exact opposite. Kant is telling us here, as you read in the text, that consequences don't really matter. Okay, what's important is your motivation for doing an action. To speak broadly, we can say that Kant's ethical theory is concerned with the question, what makes an action moral? Or what makes an action good? Mill and utilitarians would say, well, it's the consequences of an action. It's what the action produces or leads to. Kant, on the other hand, will focus on the motivation for doing the action. For Kant, we can say that not only is the action important, but it's really the motive behind the action. Okay, and for Kant, that motive has to be one of duty. In constructing this ethical theory, known as deontology, Kant appealed simply to reason itself, a priori, independent of experience. So Kant isn't looking to consequences, he's not looking to experience, he's really looking to reason itself. And he believes that reason can reveal to us what is the moral thing to do, or what is the right thing to do. Okay. So the big picture here is that duty, moral duty, will play a central, foundational role in Kant's ethical theory. If that action isn't motivated by moral duty, for Kant it really doesn't have moral worth. Okay, let's take up the topic of a good will. For the reading in this week's assignment, this is how it begins, the groundwork for the metaphysics of morals. It begins with this analysis of a good will. And Kant starts out by saying that there is no good without qualification except a good will. Now, this is something that also differs when we're talking about Kantian ethics from utilitarian theory. For Kant, the will plays a very important, or has a very important function. So I briefly want to read the first paragraph of Kant's groundwork of the metaphysics of morals, dealing with the good will, and see if we can make sense of it. He writes, "It is impossible to conceive anything at all in the world, or even out of it, which can be taken as good without qualification, except a good will. Intelligence, wit, judgment, and all other talents of mind we may care to name, or courage, resolution, and constancy of purpose, as qualities of temperament, are without doubt good and desirable in many respects. But they can also be extremely bad and hurtful when the will is not good, which has to make use of these gifts of nature, and which for this reason has the term character applied to its peculiar quality." Okay, so reading that, now you know why Kant is difficult to understand. What Kant is really getting at here, all the typical character traits, the qualities that we would view, or that most people would view as good, such as courage, resoluteness, intelligence, wit, unless those qualities and characteristics are accompanied with a good will, Kant thinks they can really be used for an evil purpose or an evil intention. So take intelligence, for example. Most people would view intelligence as something that's good, something that people should have. However, we know that intelligence can be used for a wicked, destructive purpose. You can think of a terrorist who wants to develop chemical weapons or weapons of mass destruction. Clearly, to develop those weapons, they have to have the intelligence to do so. But Kant would say their intelligence is being accompanied with a bad will. Right? The will isn't good that accompanies that intelligence. So therefore, their intelligence could ultimately be used for a wicked purpose, right? Killing innocent people. And the same thing with the other quality traits we looked at, whether it's courage or resoluteness. Both of those qualities can be used in a negative way if they're not accompanied with a good will. So the good will is very important for Kant. Without that, an action doesn't have moral worth. And it's the goodwill, Kant thinks, that gives an action moral worth. When that action is accompanied by that goodwill, the action takes on or has within it moral value. Along the same lines, we can say that a will which is motivated by self-interest, sympathy, or happiness does not express a good will. Now, what Kant means by that, let's use an example. Say you have two different people. We have person A and person B. Both persons are business owners. They're shopkeepers. Person A says that, well, I should not overcharge my customers. I should treat my customers in an honest way, because if I don't, there could be serious repercussions. There could be bad consequences. I could get a bad reputation in the community. People won't buy from me if they think there's a possibility that I'm ripping them off. So person A adopts an honest policy, but the reason they do so is because they think honesty is good for business. That the more honest you are and not ripping off customers, the better it's going to be for you personally. So their action, although what they're doing is honest and not ripping off their customers or overcharging their customers, their action is really motivated by self-interest. Okay, they're doing what's good for them. Now let's take person B. Person B says, well, I'm not going to overcharge my customers because that's the right thing to do. I'm not going to overcharge my customers because I have respect and reverence for the universal moral law, or I have a duty to act for the sake of that law. So person B's action, Kant would say, has moral worth. It has moral value. Although both person A and person B pursue honesty, person A is doing it for self-interested reasons, whereas person B is doing so out of a recognition of their duty.